Hello and welcome to the next painting guide for the Balin's Tomb Diorama. It's been a little while since the last video, since I was on holiday and simply haven't had much time since I got back. But luckily,
a wizard is never late.
Which serves as Gandalf's introduction as well. Since last video we painted everyone's favorite
Fool of a took.
I thought it only fair to paint the master of quotable references next, Gandalf the Grey. Now, I do not ask for your pardon, but if you do not like this video, then
The black speech of Mordor may yet be heard in every corner of the West.
So please leave a like to hold Mordor at bay, and maybe tell me your favorite Gandalf quote in the comments. Now, let's paint ourselves a wizard. As usual, I have covered Gandalf in a primer of Army Painter Matte Black, followed by an all-over layer of Vallejo Black to cover any of the hidden creases and gaps that the primer might have missed, and because Vallejo Black has a nicer finish for the camera. The first parts of Gandalf I wanted to tackle were his cloak and robes, so I started with an even mixture of black and Skavenblight dinge to paint the entirety of the cloak. I wanted there to be a clear difference between the cloak and robes, but I wasn't entirely sure how big a difference, so rather than completely painting the cloak first like I would normally do, I actually switched to the robes after putting down the initial layer on the cloak, so I could get an idea for how different the colors on both pieces of clothing would be. Of course both would end up being grey, as this Gandalf isn't called the Grey for nothing, so I started with a layer of 4 parts black to 1 part Wraithbone to see how things would look. I was quite happy with the slightly brighter robes to the darker cloak, so I kept going with the robes for now. Each layer increasing the brightness just a bit further by adding a part of Wraithbone each time. Going for my usual method of blending layers together to get a smooth blend from dark in the recesses to brighter on the top, with the final few layers starting to focus more on the edges of the cloth and the higher parts of the model. After finishing all the layers of grey, I go in with black to do a bit of black lining to increase contrast and clean up any mistakes where I might have accidentally hit a part of the model that's still supposed to be black. Once the robes were finished, I wanted to get back to Gandalf's cloak, as these were by far the 2 biggest parts of the model, and finishing these off would give us a great indication of what the finished model would look like. So I stuck to the original mixture of black and Skavenblight dinge, but added a bit more of the latter to start making the mixture a bit brighter. I did this for a few layers until eventually I dropped the black altogether and added a layer of pure Skavenblight dinge, while starting to focus on the upper parts of the model. Finally finishing off the cloak with a layer of 2 parts Skavenblight dinge to 1 part Stormvermin fur. After finishing off the cloak and robes, I had a good look at the differences in grey and was pleased with the result. I wanted the differences to be subtle enough that at first glance you might think they are the same color, but upon closer inspection realize that they are not, and I think I achieved exactly what I wanted here. Next up is Gandalf's blue hat, which has always annoyed me a bit, as I never felt that a random blue hat fit with the whole grey aesthetic that Gandalf in his current form was all about, but I wasn't about to go against the grain here and paint his hat a different color, so blue it is. But that doesn't mean we can't make it a subtle blue that's verging on the edge of grey. So for this, we've pulled out a paint that has seen far more use in this series so far than I expected, French Mirage Blue, and mixed 1 part of it with 2 parts black for the base coat. After this, perhaps unsurprisingly, I continue to add a bit more French Mirage Blue to this mixture, until eventually we paint a layer of pure French Mirage Blue to finish off the hat. Make sure to focus the brighter layers on the higher parts of the hat, leaving the bottom half in shadow. The hat on this model has some great folds that make it very easy to get a nice contrast between dark and light. Now it's time to add some color to the model, starting with a layer of pure burnt umber on the belt. We follow this up with a layer of burnt umber mixed evenly with Steel Legion drab. And finally a layer of pure Steel Legion drab. Next up is the one sleeve Gandalf has poking out of his staff arm, and I found it difficult to find any good reference pictures for what color it was supposed to be. I think it might have been another grey, but I figured since his cloak and robes are already grey, it would look a bit silly to paint the sleeve another grey again, so I simply decided on a darker brown to create a tiny bit of visual interest. While it's not necessarily a part of the model you want to draw attention to, you also don't want it to look like it's part of the robes or cloak, so brown it is. I started with a layer of German camo black brown, followed by a layer of German camo black brown mixed evenly with burnt umber, and finally a layer of pure burnt umber. Now it's on to Gandalf's magical staff, starting it off with an even mixture between dryad bark and burnt umber. Later on we're going to paint some object source lighting when Gandalf allows himself to risk a little more light. But for now we're just going to paint it the way we normally would. After the first layer is dried, we paint a layer of pure burnt umber on top, focusing more on the individual grains or branches of the wood. I hope that's a good way of describing it. It's similar to painting the individual strands of hair, but on the wood. I'm not sure what else to call them. Anyway, moving on. We finish off the staff with a layer of 2 parts burnt umber to 1 part Morghast bone. Let's move on to Gandalf's skin. This will really start to add some color to the model. I paint Gandalf's skin the same way I will paint every other member of the Fellowship. So if you've seen it before, you know exactly what to do, but I will cover it again here anyway. We start off with 1 part flat earth to 1 part flat brown, with a bit of white added to the mixture. You then continuously add more white for as many layers as you want to. I usually do about 3 or 4, depending on the detail of the model. I find that the mixture of these colors gives a very natural looking Caucasian skin color, better than any so-called skin colors that come directly out of the pot, at least of the ones I found. One important detail for Gandalf specifically is to pay extra attention to his nose, or you might find yourself getting lost in the long dark of Moria.
If you doubt Enoch, always follow your nose.
I of course also painted Gandalf's eyes, but did so off camera. You thought we were done painting grey, didn't you? Well, you were absolutely wrong. It's time to paint Gandalf's hair, which of course is yet another grey. I bet you're happy we painted that sleeve brown now, aren't you? In truth, Gandalf's hair is a very bright grey, almost bordering on white, so we can at least get a nice contrast with the rest of the greys. The hair is started off with an even mixture of storm vermin fur and grey cere, adding an extra part of grey cere for each additional layer on the hair. I decided to do a total of 3 coats, but you can of course do more or less depending on how much time you like spending on each individual model. Make sure to focus the final layers on the higher and lower parts of the hair to get a bit of contrast going, and paint each individual strand rather than coating the whole thing. This will leave recesses darker and sets the hair apart as its own thing. I even did a bit of black lining afterwards between the strands, but again, that's personal preference. Now it's time for the craziest color difference this model's gonna see, and that's the hilt of Glamdring, which is a nice royal blue. I only did 2 coats for this, as it's only a tiny bit of the sword you can even see, starting with dark Prussian blue, and highlighting with dark Prussian blue mixed evenly with pastel blue just to get a tiny bit of depth. Next up is Glamdring itself, as well as any other metal bits Gandalf has, such as the clasp on his belt. I decided in this video to skip showing any of the non-metallic metal work I did, as I still plan on doing a video focusing purely on non-metallic metal at some point in the future, when I feel confident my skills are good enough. For now though, I just figured I'd show you the end result and the paints I used to achieve it. But if you want to see my process in a bit more detail, you could check out any of my previous videos or just wait for the full-on guide. If you're not comfortable with doing non-metallic metal yet, you can of course also just paint any metal bits with metal paint. Gandalf is almost completely done. The only thing we have yet to paint is the stone in his staff and the accompanying object source light. I should mention we never painted the shoes. I decided to leave those black as we've got enough greys and I don't want them to draw any attention when painting them another color. Anyway, we paint the stone white and then move on to the object source lighting. Unfortunately, when starting this OSL, I thought it would be a good idea to just use white, since the light coming from the stone is white. But it turned out to not look very good, so whilst I'm showing you footage for that, I wouldn't recommend painting it like that. After realizing my mistake, I fixed everything back up again and then took a different approach. I went through each individual piece of the model that was being lit up, and used the original colors I used to paint them, but adding white to the mixtures. So for example, for the cloak, I took the final mixture of Skavenblight Dinge mixed with Storm Vermin Fur, and then added white to that to highlight where the OSL from the staff would hit. Unfortunately, whilst I was experimenting with this, I didn't get to record any of it, so the only footage I can show you is me pointing out all the places on the model where I added OSL. I'm sure OSL is another topic I will cover at some point in the future in its own video, so I'll be able to go into more detail on it then. Finally, to finish Gandalf, I varnished him twice with Ultra Matte Varnish by AK Interactive, because it has a lovely matte finish. After which I put Gandalf on his Balin's tomb inspired base and put him with the others. That's 4 down and 5 to go. This diorama is starting to get somewhere. That's gonna do it for everyone's favorite conjurer of cheap tricks. A while ago I uploaded a poll on the community page of my channel asking who to paint next, and the winner of that poll was Aragorn, so that's who's getting painted up in the next video. That just leaves Sam, Merry, Legolas and Gimli for a final 4 miniatures. I would love it if you guys could leave a comment with your favorite quote from one of those 4 characters, and whoever's quote is the best I will paint up after Aragorn. That'll do for now. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please let me know if you did in the form of a like or a comment, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you for watching and have an amazing day.